because they are offensive. So, church leaders think, hey, we have got this issue buttoned up, problem solved. Nothing can seriously go wrong now. Well, let's see. Verse 26. The next day, Paul took them in and purified himself along with them. Then he went to the temple. Remember the big temple, the temple of that was originally Solomon's temple. It was destroyed. Then the exiles came back and rebuilt, and then during in subsequent years, it was added on to, refurbished and so forth by Herod, among other folks, and still, it was nowhere near as big a deal as the original temple that Solomon built, but it was still a pretty big deal. Uh, he went to the temple to give notice of the date when the days of purification would end, and the offering would be made for each of them. So far, so good. Yes. Hmm. Yes. Yes, it does. It did. Because the vow was all about sacrificial acts, including up to and including, hey, I'm paying good money that I could have paid, to go see a movie or eat out or whatever, and this is going to cost me something because that's money I could have spent on something else, on my own or for members of my family or even honoring God in other ways. Not at all. Maybe. Yes. Maybe the thinking was, Paul, if you pay their way, you're taking that extra step that not only uh, puts these rumors to rest, but just basically drives a stake through their heart. Paul not only makes the vow, completes the vow, but he takes that extra step that he doesn't have and he pays the way of these other gentlemen. Who knows? There's an interesting there's a minority report among the commentaries, and I'm just going to throw out here, but you keep in the back of your head, based on what we're about to read, that maybe the church leaders made a mistake suggesting that Paul do this. Hmm. You know, yes, no, not at all, not at all. He knows all that Paul knows at this point is that trouble's going to be out there, but where or how or who's involved, he doesn't know. Only God knows. But Paul's fixing to find out. So he goes through this completion of the vows, and in fact, he is as verse 27 opens up. Uh, he's actually he's completed the vows. He is stepping out of the temple, or he is somewhere in the range of the temple. He's at least in the temple courtyards, as verse 27 opens. When the 7 days were nearly over, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. Well, these were, you know, hey, big deal. Really? Yeah, as it turns out, yeah, it is a big deal. These were not Jews who, we're talking when we talk about the province of Asia, we're talking about Asia Minor, where Paul has done a lot of his missionary work. We're talking about, uh, the equivalent of modern day Western Turkey, and the cities that were in there, Lystra, um, Derbe, other cities where Paul had helped establish churches and church homes. and converted a lot of folks. He had a lot of friends from that region. He also, very probably needs to be said, he probably also had some very stringent enemies. There were some folks, there were some Jews who rejected Paul's gospel message and pushed back. In fact, recall the episodes in some cities where Paul was basically ran for his life out of town, or there were folks who were fixing to stone him, or actually in one episode actually did. Uh, as vivid, as intense, and as deeply felt as there were for those Jewish converts who loved Paul and prayed for him and supported him, there were very likely folks who equally hated Paul. Look what he's doing to us. He's destroying our lifestyle. He is making a mockery of everything that we believe in. Some of those Jews, for whatever reason, and maybe it's because if Paul wanted to get to Jerusalem by Pentecost, one of the major Jewish holidays, maybe these folks are in for Pentecost. That's what has attracted them there. They're in the same area. They enter the temple courtyard just as Paul has, and they've seen him. They've known him because Paul debated them and successfully, and that leaves some. When you're the loser of a big argument or a big debate, sometimes you remember that and who was on the opposing side, and who was, man, that guy made a fool of me. So these are the guys who see Paul. They're not his friends. In fact, they are stalwart enemies. What happens? They stirred up the whole crowd, and that's the crowd that's in the courtyard. And they seized Paul, and they were shouting, "Fellow Israelites, help us! This is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law and this place. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place." Well, good grief. Why did they say that? Because they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with Paul, and they assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple. Now, this was kind of a stupid argument to make because, for two reasons. Number one, Paul, a devout Jew, would have known better than to bring a Gentile inside the temple, or even attempt to bring him inside the temple. Number two, if he had even tried to do it, he would already be dead because there were signs everywhere. There, just to give you an idea, in the temple, the temple area, the courtyard surrounding the temple, there was a certain perimeter that was open to everyone, Jew or Gentile. Didn't matter whether you're Jewish or not. You could be in that perimeter. You could go into. You could walk around in it. You could do handstands, whatever, cartwheels. Nobody would worry about it. Hey, fine. You could do it. You could walk through that perimeter kind of as a shortcut if you wanted to get on the other side of the city. Fine and dandy. But there was this big line. Maybe they even kind of painted it in dotted stripes. I don't know. But there was a demarcation line, real or imaginary. But along that demarcation, there were signs that were posted in Greek and in Latin that said, to effect, "No foreigner may enter within the barricade which surrounds the temple and enclosure. Anyone who is caught trespassing will bear personal responsibility for his ensuing death." In other words, Gentiles, you cross this line and we catch you, you're going to die. And you know what? The Romans allowed it. Now, theoretically, and on the law books, Nobody had the right to put anyone else to death. If you had a problem if you had a capital crime that required punishment, you left it to the Romans. Law and order. There were certain people who were assigned to do that. It was the Roman government, basically their soldiers, and there were a whole bunch of them, of course, in Jerusalem. But even the Romans turned a blind eye to this. Even if the offender was a Roman citizen, you could be put to death. If you were a Gentile, didn't matter whether you're a Roman citizen or not. If you were caught in the wrong place at the wrong time and the Jews decided they wanted to do something about it, Romans would kind of look the other way and let them do it. So Paul knew better. In fact, most anybody would have known better. But hey, this was a good time for a hot time in the old town tonight. A riot breaks out. The whole city was aroused. They were disturbed, and people came running from all directions. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple, or probably specifically the temple area, the court area, and immediately the gates were shut. While they were, and here's the next sentence. This is what I like. Look what you're talking about here. While they were trying to kill him, in other words, this was more than just hustling Paul out. They were inflicting bodily injuries on him, severe battery. So while this is going on, news reached the commander of the Roman troops that the whole city of Jerusalem was in uproar. Can't let that happen. If the Roman Empire, if the Roman government was if nothing else, they were really, really law and order, especially out of the empire territories, the ones that had been conquered. Okay, guys, here's the deal. If you want to coexist with us, you don't act up for anything. And Roman soldiers, if you see any kind of outbreak of mob violence like that, you put it down, no questions asked. As it turns out, the Roman soldiers went so far as to build a fortress for themselves on the northwest corner of the temple area. So they were literally next door to the temple. Why? Well, Jerusalem, in terms of Jerusalem is what you might call the company town for the Jewish religion, especially because you have the temple there, the heart, the center, physical and spiritual and all things else, the center of Jewish worship and Jewish beliefs. And if any problem was going to happen, it was probably going to happen there. So literally next door, the Romans built what came to be known as the Tower of Antonia. It was a literal fortress. It could house more than 500 soldiers. So that if anything broke out, they were seconds away. Because if any fighting was going to occur, it was probably going to occur at or near the temple, or so the reasoning thought. So the commander didn't have to go far. He may not have had all 500 soldiers with him, but he had enough. He at once took some officers and soldiers and ran down to the crowd. When the rioters saw the commander and his soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Whew. Just in the nick of time. So here's what the commander does. The commander doesn't know what's going on. All he knows is, hey, big riot. People are fighting each other. Look who the center of the fighting is about. That guy. Go grab that guy, put him under arrest. That's what he does. The commander came up and arrested Paul and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. Figuring, hey, this is a real troublemaker. We want to make sure he doesn't break loose and start things up again. Then he asked who he was and what he had done. So interesting. Paul is bound, double tied, or maybe one chain bound his arms, the other chain bound his legs, so he's just demobilized. But hey, guess what? Brother Agabus's prophecy is being fulfilled here. The owner of this belt is going to be bound. And yeah, the Roman soldiers are, the Roman people are doing it, but it's at the instigation of these Jewish individuals who hate Paul. So the Roman soldier does, the Roman commander does what all good Roman commanders do, the equivalent of shoot first, ask questions later. He has Paul arrested, has him tied up, and then he starts asking questions about what's going on here. And he asked it of the crowd. And some in the crowd, verse 34, shouted one thing and some another. This is a description that sounds very, very similar to the mob riot in Ephesus that we studied not so long ago back in chapter 19. In fact, almost the exact words that Luke uses to say the miscommunication that's going on here. Some people are saying one thing, some another. In fact, this whole thing, this whole episode is caused by misinformation and assumption. Just, you know, and gee, just think how much worse it would have been if they had actually had social media in the day. It was bad enough. In fact, probably the lesson here is you don't need social media to spread misinformation and stir things up. Right place, right time, right circumstances, you can get a real riot starting, which is what we've got here. So the commander asks for information, and all he's getting is people shouting one thing or another at him, and he's having trouble trying to figure out what's going on. When the commander could not get at the truth because of the uproar, he ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. When Paul reached the steps, the violence of the mob was so great that he had to be carried by the soldiers. Amazing. Here we have the soldiers are actually body surf or crowd surfing Paul. You know, it's kind of like those old concerts where, you know, in fact, it probably looked exactly like an old rock concert without the rock music and the band, of course. But Paul's being hustled along on the hands and the shoulders of the soldiers here, working their way, trying to get him into the barracks, into the fortress, and into some degree of safety. And probably doing it as quickly as possible because verse 36, the crowd that followed them kept shouting, "Get rid of him," or more precisely, "Kill him." The crowd is so worked up. This is more than, "Hey, we have a philosophical disagreement with this guy. You know, just put him in the brig for a couple of days and let him cool off, and then escort him out of town." It was far past that. It was more like, "Let's kill him, and let's kill him now." That was how heated everything was. In fact, you had to wonder if Paul was having a little bit of a deja vu moment, you know, back when Stephen was being stoned, because it was that kind of heated intensity. Let's kill the guy. And of course, back in then, Paul was on the other side. He was among those who were egging on the crowd. Yeah, let's get rid of this guy because we don't like what he's saying. And now he is the intended victim of this mob justice. What's going to happen here? Well, he does make it into the barracks. Verse 37, Luke continues, as the soldiers were about to take Paul into the barracks, he asked the commander, "May I say something to you?" And apparently this startles the commander. It's like, what's going on here? Because his response is, "Do you speak Greek?" And probably more precisely is, "Do you really speak Greek? Are you intelligent enough to speak the Greek language?" This was something that the commander was not anticipating from Paul. He just figured Paul was another of these runabout religious fanatics who periodically stirred things up. And he explained, aren't you, or actually, he continues because he makes an assumption here. And he asked Paul, aren't you the Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists out into the wilderness some time ago? And this actual episode was more than just a rumor or a myth. The historian Josephus said this actually happened. There was this outbreak that did concern an Egyptian, and it was put down very quickly. It was unsuccessful in terms of trying to overturn the government or whatever, and as it turned out, the revolters ran out and hid in the Mount of Olives nearby. But here is one more piece of misinformation about Paul. Yes, we finally got him. We've been looking for this guy. The leader of the revolt got away, and so his assumption was, "Hey, we found him." And again, this is like, okay, we'll arrest him and ask questions later, and see if our assumptions are true. So it says, "Aren't you the guy who led the revolt like last week? We've been looking for." Paul responds, "I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city." That that was Paul's sly way of saying, "Hey, guy, I'm a Roman citizen." It's like, we yeah, jaw drop moment. Even today we have a couple of Paul were one of our beloved snarky brethren. He might say something like along the lines of, "Yeah, I'm from Troas. Maybe you've heard of it." It's like we might say, "Yeah, I'm from Dallas. You might have heard of it. A little town up the road. You might have heard of it. Yeah." Uh, that's kind of manner of speaking, but the reference to Tarsus is no ordinary city. It was no mean city. Yeah, the whatever education the commander had, he would have known about Troas. It was a major city in the empire. So, but Paul doesn't let it stop there. He makes an extraordinary request. He says, "Please let me speak to the people." Paul, really? these people are trying to kill you. Are you out of your mind? But think of Paul's thinking. Think of what his response was at the riot at Ephesus. What did Paul want to do? He wanted to speak to the crowd, to the rioters, and he was talked out of it, or at least maybe even physically restrained by his friends. Paul, don't do it. Don't go there. But Paul's thinking is, hey, what a crowd. What an opportunity. I can preach Jesus to so many people here. And so that's his wish. A lot of us, I suspect my first response was, yeah, get me into those barricades. Get me out of the way of all this. We can figure out what to do later. Paul says, here's a moment. I want to take advantage of it. Let's do it. Let me speak to the people, please. And the commander agrees. Who knew? He receives the commander's permission. Paul stood on the steps of the Antonia fortress, and he motioned to the crowd. And amazingly, they all fall silent. And when they were all silent, he said to them in their own language. Now, my translation says he spoke to them in Aramaic. You may have a translation that says he spoke to them in Hebrew. Basically, hey, he spoke their language to the crowd. And he was about to say, but our time is done. So we're going to have to save it. Basically, we're at the end of the chapter, end of our allotted time. So what let's do is, yes, boring. Yes. What will Paul do? What will Paul say? Tune in next week for the exciting conclusion of this episode. There is more to come. So, if you will, please read chapter 22. That will be the basis of our lesson that we'll have next Sunday, Lord willing. And look at that. We'll be prepared to talk about it at that time. Where Paul, we're going to have a flashback moment in the story in the life of Paul. And in the meantime, have a great week. Enjoy the weather. For as nice as it is, hopefully it'll hang on there. Let's continue to pray for rain, and maybe the lakes will continue to be recharged. Leave it in God's hands. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed the lesson, got something out of it. We'll see you next Sunday, Lord willing.